In 1973, not a single bullet was fired, yet the world's leading superpower was brought to its knees by a thick, black liquid. When Arab nations decided to turn off the oil taps, America plunged into chaos. Gas stations shuttered, the stock market evaporated, 45% of its value, and for the first time in history, Americans had to wait in line just to buy a few gallons of fuel. It was the moment the world realized a terrifying truth. Oil was no longer just a commodity. It was a weapon of mass destruction. 50 years later, that life-or-death chess game is repeating itself, but with far more sophisticated moves and entirely new players. Before decoding the current conflict, we must face a grim reality that many are choosing to ignore. Oil is not just gasoline. Look around you, from the smartphone in your hand and the medicine you take, to the asphalt beneath your feet and the fertilizers feeding billions, everything originates from oil. There are over 6,000 essential products that breathe thanks to this liquid. You can replace internal combustion engines with electric batteries, but you can never replace oil in the backbone of the global supply chain, at least not for several decades to come. Every day, the world burns through 100 million barrels of oil. This figure isn't just a dry statistic on a digital screen. It is the heartbeat of modern civilization. If that flow stops, the entire world freezes instantly. And here is the law of geopolitics. He who controls the flow of those 100 million barrels controls the heartbeat of the planet. Washington understood this truth nearly a century ago and used it to build an empire. But now, Beijing is aggressively preparing to rewrite those rules of the game in its own image. After the 1973 shock, the United States faced a life-or-death puzzle: how to control global energy without having to occupy every single oil well. The answer didn't lie in the barrel of a gun. It lay in a contract. In 1974, Henry Kissinger flew to Riyadh with an offer the House of Saud couldn't refuse. The U.S. will guarantee the survival of the Saudi royal family with absolute military might. In exchange, Saudi Arabia must sell its oil in only one currency, the US dollar. One domino fell, pulling the entire OPEC bloc with it. Since then, a perpetual loop was established, turning America's green paper into black gold in paper form. You want oil to run your economy, you must have dollars. You want dollars? You must export goods to the US. Or borrow from the U.S. system. Have excess dollars? You use them to buy U.S. treasuries. It was a perfect financial trap. The U.S. could print money to buy oil, while the rest of the world had to work tirelessly to earn those same bills just to keep their energy flowing. Washington's true power doesn't reside in its 11 aircraft carrier strike groups or thousands of nuclear warheads. It lies here. No nation on this planet can industrialize without the permission of the U.S. financial system. But every empire has its cracks. The petrodollar machine ran smoothly for 50 years based on a single belief: acceptance of the rules. And now, as other superpowers begin to reject these rules, the entire massive structure is starting to shake violently. China is currently the world's factory, but it is a giant with feet of clay. Importing 11.3 million barrels of oil per day, with an external dependency of 73%, Beijing's energy security sits squarely in the hands of others. And that nightmare became a reality in February 2022, when the West froze $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves in the blink of an eye. No shots fired. No courtrooms needed. Beijing received a chilling message. In a U.S.-led financial system, your assets are just numbers that can be erased at any moment. To avoid becoming the next victim, China has activated an escape campaign across 3 critical fronts. Front 1: gold, the ultimate shield. Beijing is frantically hoarding gold. Why? Because gold is the only physical asset that cannot be frozen by any digital sanction. With over 2,264 tons, and likely much more in the shadows, gold is their emergency oxygen tank. Front 2: the Petro-Yuan, financial leverage. China no longer wants to use dollars to buy oil. They are pressuring partners like Russia, Iran, and most recently, Saudi Arabia, to accept payments in yuan. This is no longer an empty threat. It is a direct strike to the heart of the petrodollar system. Front 3. Breaking the chokehold. Geography. The U.S. controls the oceans, specifically the throat of the Strait of Malacca. To break this encirclement, China is pouring billions into overland energy corridors, the Power of Siberia pipeline from Russia, Central Asian routes, and the CPEC corridor through Pakistan. The goal is crystal clear: to build a world where the flow of oil and currency no longer has to pass through Washington's guard post. From the Oval Office in Washington, the geopolitical landscape is painted in a completely different light. To the United States, the petrodollar system is not the shackles of a hegemon, but the anchor that keeps the global economic ship from capsizing in a volatile ocean. Washington presents a steel-clad argument. A dollar-based order is an order of rules, transparency, and oversight. Conversely, any system led by Beijing would be a black box where the interests of a single nation are placed above the fair operation of the global market. Therefore, the crippling sanctions aimed at Iran or Venezuela are not viewed by Washington as an attack on China. They call it a mission to protect international norms. But look at the actual consequences: a cold, calculated chess move by the US. Number 1. The energy gray zone. When Iran and Venezuela are severed from the mainstream financial system, they are backed into a corner, forced to sell their oil at dirt-cheap prices just to survive. Number 2. The sweet trap. China, with its insatiable thirst for energy, is the only player willing to embrace this cheap oil. Beijing might think it's winning big by securing bargain-priced resources, but in reality, they are pushing themselves into a high-risk legal gray zone. Number 3. The sword of secondary sanctions. Washington knows that with a single stroke of a pen, they can penalize any Chinese bank or corporation daring to trade with these pariah states. This is the agonizing dilemma Washington has placed on Beijing's scale. Do you want cheap oil for economic growth, or do you want to maintain your standing in the global financial system? You cannot have both without facing the risk of being unplugged from the dollar network at any moment. Washington doesn't need to stop the flow of oil to China. They only need to ensure that every barrel comes with a staggering geopolitical tax. This is the point that most analysts overlook or underestimate. Many believe that to maintain an off-the-books oil supply, Beijing must bleed foreign currency and endure exorbitant costs. But the reality is a cold, efficient, economic calculation. Welcome to the world of the shadow fleet. It is a massive network of hundreds of aging, nameless tankers registered under obscure flags of convenience. They move like oil slicks across the ocean, turning off their AIS tracking devices, changing names mid-sea, and quietly docking at ports. This is how oil from Russia, Iran, and Venezuela flows directly into refineries in China and India without leaving a trace on Western monitoring systems. Let's look at the hard numbers. Number 1. The cost of these underground operations is roughly 5 to 12% higher than normal. Number 2. But remember, Russia and Iran are offering massive discounts from $10 to $20 per barrel. It's a simple math problem. Instead of buying Brent oil at a market price of $80, Beijing buys Russian oil at $65, adds a $5 shadow shipping fee, and the result? They still save $10 per barrel. Multiply that by millions of barrels a day, and you see a massive profit engine capable of funding an entire parallel financial system. China has even built its own armor. They've established their own insurance systems through PICC and Sinosure, completely bypassing dependence on Western institutions like Lloyd's of London. However, this game is not for the faint of heart. It comes with extreme risks. Number 1. Environmental catastrophe. These aging ghost ships are ticking time bombs at sea. An oil spill could cause an ecological disaster for which no one takes responsibility. Number 2. Legal gray zones. Operating outside the law makes shipments vulnerable to seizure or complicated legal disputes. Number 3. The sanction blade. If the U.S. decides to go all in, with secondary sanctions targeting the banks that settle payments for this fleet. The actual cost will skyrocket, turning the advantage into a crippling burden. This is a global game of cat and mouse. Washington attempts to cast the net, while Beijing constantly finds ways to tear through it using cards hidden in the shadows. Oil is the war of the present, but Beijing is playing a game on a much longer timeline. They understand one thing. The best way to avoid being strangled by the oil weapon is to make that weapon obsolete. Electric vehicles, the silent escape. While the world debates climate change, China has turned EVs into a national security asset. Today, over half of the new cars hitting their streets are electric or hybrid. The math of survival. For every 1 million EVs on the road, China cuts its demand by approximately 50,000 barrels of oil per day. If this pace holds, China's thirst for oil will peak and then plummet. When that happens, their ultimate Achilles heel dependence on oil flows through strategic straits will be neutralized. Chips and green energy, the new OPEC. Washington is pouring resources into the semiconductor war, not just for AI, but because they know data and batteries are the new oil. China currently controls the lion's share of the global lithium battery and solar panel supply chains. They don't just want to buy energy. They want to own the technology that creates it. If the 20th century belonged to those who controlled the oil wells, the 21st century will belong to whoever controls the renewable energy supply chain. BRICS Plus and a new financial operating system. The expanded BRICS bloc, featuring oil giants like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, is no longer just a talk shop. 10 years ago, paying for oil in a currency other than the dollar was science fiction. Today, it is a constant dialogue. Beijing is patiently building a parallel financial operating system with the yuan at its core. Once nations can trade energy without passing through the US payment gateway, the petrodollar sword will lose its edge. In a world filled with extreme viewpoints, the biggest mistake is to rush into picking a side. Geopolitical truth rarely exists in black or white. It lives in the murky gray area between two opposing narratives. Narrative 1. Why Washington's argument carries weight. The US isn't just protecting the dollar. They are protecting a world operating system. Stability. Like it or not, the petrodollar system has provided a universal reference frame, keeping global trade stable for half a century. Containment tools. Sanctions on Iran or Venezuela, in Washington's view, are necessary fences to restrain nations that defy international norms. Fear of multipolarity. A world without a sheriff isn't necessarily more free. It could become a chaotic arena where powers endlessly tear at each other for influence. Narrative 2. Why Beijing's voice finds sympathy. China isn't just seeking to rise. They are seeking insurance for their survival. Asset security. The overnight freezing of $300 billion in Russian reserves was a brutal wake-up call. No nation wants to place its entire destiny in the hands of a superpower that can unplug them at any moment. The injustice of the printing press. The dollar monopoly allows the US to print money to solve domestic crises, while pushing the burden of inflation and debt onto the rest of the world. To developing nations, this feels like a modern imperial tax. The right to choose. Diversifying payments isn't a declaration of war. It is a fundamental right of self-determination to avoid systemic risk. The brutal truth behind the game. Make no mistake, neither side is acting out of pure morality or for the benefit of humanity. This is a clash between two massive national interests, camouflaged by flowery terms like freedom or fairness. Oil is merely the pretext, the raw fuel powering this conflict. The real war isn't about who sells more oil. It is about who will hold the pen to write the rules for the global economy for the next 50 years. One side is fighting to preserve the legacy of the 20th century, while the other is exploiting every loophole to build a new order for the 21st. History is a graveyard of systems once thought to be eternal. The Bretton Woods gold standard lasted a mere 27 years, before being terminated by President Nixon in 1971. The petrodollar system has endured a much longer journey, 50 years, and now the first deep fractures have become impossible to hide. The real question is not if this order will change, but how. Will it collapse into chaos or evolve into a new form? We are standing before three scenarios that could reshape your very life. Scenario 1: resilience. If Washington maintains its military alliances with the Gulf and holds the keys to high-end chip technology, the petrodollar system may remain standing for decades, even if its dominance is no longer absolute. Scenario 2: a financially bipolar world. A new Iron Curtain is drawn. On one side sits the Western dollar-euro bloc, on the other, the yuan-ruble bloc of the rest of the world. A world where trade becomes more expensive and complex, but arguably safer for emerging powers. Scenario 3: the Green Revolution checkmates oil. This is the most dramatic path. If EVs and renewable energy advance faster than expected, oil will lose its power over life and death. The entire petrodollar war will become a closed chapter in history books. At that point, both the US and China must dive into a new chessboard where oil is no longer king. Remember a brutal truth of history. The greatest financial wars are not decided by the strongest, but by those who adapt the fastest. Oil was once the uncrowned king ruling this planet, but every king has his day of abdication. When that moment arrives, which side of history will you be standing on? If you want to continue decoding the undercurrents reshaping our world, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.